everybody, and welcome back to the No Vacancy Podcast with me, Glenn Hausman. So today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a bonus episode for you because I got some great content coming our way. You know, we all love to bash what's going on in the airline industries, but J.D. Powers is saying customer satisfaction has been rising 7 years in a row. So we're going to have a great opportunity to talk to them today. But before we get going, I just did want to say that this show is brought to you in part by Duetto, the revenue strategy technology platform that thousands of hotels are using to make more money. And I know each and every one of you out there love making more money. And if you're not checking out Duetto, you're missing out on that great opportunity. Be sure to check out getrevenueresults.com and go on to my novacancynews.com website. Click on their ad and you'll get access to a great white paper on the blueprint for taking back business from the OTAs. I highly encourage you to take a look at that particular paper. You're going to learn a lot. And again, you're going to make more money. All right, so today, I got to tell you, I feel like I've lost it. I feel like I'm never going to get out of this maze, but somebody who's going to help me get out of it is Michael Taylor. He's the travel practice lead at J.D. Power. Michael, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. All right, so we're going to get to the bottom of this customer satisfaction on airlines. You released your big study on it last week that comes out every year. And for you listeners out there, we had a chance to speak with Michael last year, so I encourage you to go check the May 22nd show from 2017 and see how it compares to this one that's coming out in early June 2018. So, Michael, I think the best place to start, overarching, what's your opinion? What are you thinking about? Any surprises?
Well, it's not so much my opinion. We survey 11,500 travelers this past year about their experience on airlines. And once again, the airline as an industry has set a new high. They're up 6 points on our 1,000-point scale, 762 if you're keeping score at home.
I got to keep score at home when it comes to this. And I'm guessing out of the 11,000 people you talked to, you didn't talk to that guy who got beat up on United. But that's another story. My jokes. I don't have you don't have to participate in my bad airline humor. So go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So this is a new all-time high for the industry. They're really hitting on all cylinders, despite the fact that the airplane is a little bit more crowded, and we'll talk about that, what that actually means to the experience. But on-time performance, the bag claim, performance, number of FAA complaints, all that matches all-time bests or near all-time bests, and it matches our data as well. People are happier than they've ever been flying in the United States.
Why? That I guess I know why, because I'm on an airplane so many times throughout the year. But at the same time, I feel like airline satisfaction gets put through this prism, and all that comes out at the other end is people complaining about stuff. So I think that it winds up creating an inordinate feeling that the airplanes are really doing a bad job. But me, as a frequent flyer, I'm pretty satisfied with my airline of choice.
Yeah, you get to pick and choose. One thing that's happening in the industry is there's a disaggregation. That's the word we used last year, and it's being applied to even deeper in the experience now. Disaggregation means the baggage fees. You were always paying for your bag to fly. That was never free to begin with. It was always factored in the ticket price. But they disaggregated it, the industry did, because they know how you shop for an airline flight, which is you look at a list of things either on an online travel agent or in the direct booking space and say, this flight is $25 cheaper. And it's about the same times I want to leave and arrive, and you'll pick that flight.
Right. And
just that small increment or difference in airfares makes a huge difference of which airline you're going to pick when you fly from New York to LA or Chicago to Toronto. So knowing that, they've kind of split the experience apart, and they've offered basic economy in several of the big airlines out in the North America. Simply to get that listing down as low as possible. And there was a little bit of issues. This is really the first full year that it's been implemented, say, at United and perhaps American, I think would probably be that'd probably be a good estimate. And, let's not blame the customer, but some people don't know exactly what they're clicking on sometimes. And they show up with those two bags when they're supposed to have one bag. And they're told, hey, we're going to charge you $25 for that bag. And poof, there goes the price difference I had when I picked this flight. Now, it's a little bit of communication on behalf of the airlines, a little bit of misunderstanding on part of the customers for the most part. But we see some of that happening with some of the airlines and some in the data that we see at J.D. Power.
So is there any differentiation? Because like you talk about these bag fees and me as a frequent traveler and essentially every other human being that I speak to, because they're also frequent travelers, never even think about baggage fees because that's one of the things that the airlines give you, free baggage, when you reach a certain status. So I have a feeling that makes me more satisfied, generally speaking.
Well, it probably makes you more loyal. I don't know about more satisfied, but it makes you more loyal because once you've reached that level, you don't want to lose it.
It definitely makes me feel more loyal. And even though, and I got to tell you, even though when my airline really, really pisses me off, it's something that passes rather quickly because I'm not going to start from scratch. I've already made platinum status for next year, and I'm not gonna start over with another airline. But I'm curious: is when you speak to these thousands and thousands of people, do you know what percentage of them might be frequent flyers, or what percentage of them are the ones that fly once a year? Because my gut is telling me, not based on facts or anything like that, but the answers you might get and the feelings might be inconsistent between those two groups.
Oh, they are. They definitely are. Their expectations change from top tier to no status members. But to get back to the point you just made there, was that one of the things we look at is the commitment that passengers have to a particular airline.
Right.
We ask them if they're proud to fly that airline, and if they'd be disappointed if they couldn't book a ticket on that airline, the one they've flown on. And from that, we get an index of commitment. And what we find out is exactly what you were just saying, is that if I'm committed to an airport and an airline, and I know they're trying and they treat me well for the most part, when they make a mistake, I am not going to come down on them like a ton of bricks.
Right.
For example, if some of the less committed airlines, and I'll just tell you right now because it's in the data, United Airlines and American are have a little bit less committed flyers. When the plane is late, when the flight is late, they get dinged by about 100 points on our 1,000-point scale. But JetBlue and Alaska and Southwest have a high commitment type of traveler. They only lose 50 points, so about half, because people are willing to forgive because they know those airlines are trying, and that's what they really want to see. And that's sort of an emotional relationship that the traveler has. And as you move up in that status, you're more likely to get recognized. They'll say, welcome back, Mr. Houseman. They'll use your name. That's really a magic for anybody who travels a lot. If they know who I am and they know what seat I'm sitting in. And for your viewers, I'm sure you know this, Glenn, but for your listeners, when you see that flight attendant tapping into what looks like their cell phone, they're not text messaging. They're checking who's sitting in what seat, and they know your name and they know all the history you've got on that airline. So what we find in the data is that that if people have that emotional commitment and they are being treated well, as I mentioned before, if they use your name and they know where you're sitting and they recognize you as a status flying member, that kind of loyalty and emotional commitment that breeds helps you to forgive the airline when a mistake happens.
Right. Yeah. You know what? I completely agree with you because the more that they just extend kindness and passion to me, the more I'm going to give them free passes when stuff gets screwed up. And I think the other thing that I've learned as a frequent traveler is when stuff goes wrong, just take a deep breath and ride with it. Don't try to fight back against it. And I don't think that that's something that infrequent travelers, that once a year person who's going away, really seems to be able to handle, right? If you get a delay because of an equipment problem or even because of weather, I think those folks are more likely to freak out as opposed to me, who might just go to the bar.
That's what I do.
Right.
That's my strategy.
Yeah.
Delayed flights. Where's the alcohol?
Right.
So
I'll tell you,
anyway.
the worst part about flying to me is when I get upgraded to either Comfort Plus, which I usually am able to book on my own as a platinum person, or I get upgraded to first class, and then I can't really drink too much because I got to drive home from the airport. That to me is really difficult for me to handle. So not quite the airlines, but it still makes me very sad.
A man's got to know his limitations.
I know, right, for sure. So, okay, what are some of the things that you found other than record high customer satisfaction? I'm finding that there's probably increased satisfaction because I'm seeing over the last few years a lot of new equipment being brought into service.
Oh yeah, that's actually a very good point. Yeah, we break things down into factors. The res process, check-in, boarding, aircraft, flight crew, in-flight services, and cost and fees. And the item that's up the largest amount, the most points, 15 points on our 1,000-point scale, is the aircraft itself.
Wow.
And that's because people are, certain airlines are bringing in in the last 14, 15 months, have brought on board some very nice aircraft, and I'm thinking mostly about the 737 Maxes that have appeared in both Southwest and with Air Canada. And Air Canada did very well in our survey from last year, and with 50 points, not just 15, but 50 points up in the aircraft index part of it. So with the new aircraft, there's a couple things that come along with it. First off, people like you and me and everybody else, we're all human beings. We really don't distinguish between condition and cleanliness. And by condition, I mean the age of anything.
Yes.
If something is worn or it's broken, it's just dirty. No, you could have open heart surgery on it. It could be that clean. It'll never be considered to be clean. So the new aircraft gets obviously great cleanliness scores, even though it's clean the same way as the other one does. It's just lack of scratches and lack of wear and tear in the aircraft. And then the second part of it is, which is going to morph into where we're having a little bit of issue with the industry, is all the in-flight streaming and the electronics and the connectivity in the aircraft itself.
Well, I got something I want to talk about that, but before we move on from the cleanliness and aging issue, for me, it's like if I'm on an airline that I don't frequent, say I'm in Europe and I'm hopping from place to place, and I still see like ashtrays in the seat armrests, then all of a sudden, my spidey sense starts tingling in a major way that gets me scared. And I'm never going to like that flight.
I just mentioned that to someone last week. I said, I can remember, it was a millennial. And I said, you've never been on an aircraft that actually has ashtrays in the seat handles or in the armrest.
Yep.
And then they were like, people did that? I said, oh yeah, the back of the plane was as smoky as you can get.
I know. It was absolutely amazing. And I will say to all of you listening that don't understand why you still see those ashtrays by the labs, that's because if some jerk is actually smoking on the plane, you do need a place to put it out. So that's not a cleanliness issue, it's a safety issue. So go on, let's talk about those electronic devices.
Yeah, well, this is probably the biggest challenge. We saw the only factor that we saw a drop in this past year at JD Power was in in-flight services, which would be the food, the beverage, and then the connectivity.
Yep.
So part of it, of course, is this new basic economy where you're lucky you get a bag of peanuts. I don't think you even get that on some flights, and or pretzels.
Yeah,
I think you've got pretzels now. And so you're kind of used to getting that, and that you've chosen this basic economy fare, which is as cheap as you can get. And, you're really wishing you could get that bag of peanuts or something to eat or something to drink without having to pay for it. So that's part of it. The other part of it is we see a big gap in the connectivity because of the airline industry realizes about 94% of people that get on an aircraft are carrying their own screen with them. They've got a laptop, they've got a tablet, they've got their smartphone.
Yep.
I've got a Samsung
I've got all of them.
S8.
Yeah.
They all play movies for me, or stream TV or Hulu or whatever everybody else has got. The issue arises within each airline, there are probably on average, I would say, about 3 different generations of connectivity equipment, of hardware on the actual aircraft itself. So within any within an airline brand, you can have a very different experience depending on which aircraft you're on, even if it is a 737 or an A320. Now, the A321s are probably pretty standardized now these days. So that's become an issue. And I think we're seeing this gap here, these negative numbers in the in-flight services, somewhat because of the basic economy offerings and what people really wish they could get, even though they don't want to part with cash to get it. And then secondly, they're kind of expecting, I think their expectation is I'm going to be connected very easily. And that's not happening very well, especially with people with their PEDs, personal entertainment device, which is most smartphone or a tablet.
Right.
They have a lot less satisfaction than believe it or not, the mounted TVs that are still on certain aircraft, that are displaying a program or a movie in flight. And usually those are associated with larger aircraft as well, so there's a little bit of a halo effect there.
Right.
But this connectivity, expectations are rising, and performance is lagging. And I have to defend the industry here because it is very expensive to put the latest technology in an aircraft. You got to take an aircraft out of service. That's 200 some odd seats in a normal aircraft or so, let's say 175. That's not earning you money for the days that you've got it in the hangar, putting in that hardware. And the hardware is not easy to put in. Though you can't just string wire across the top of the aircraft's fuselage.
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done to put that stuff in. And, what the airlines have learned that, once you put it in, 2 years later, it's the iPhone 4. It's like, oh my God, this is technology is dated and slow, and it doesn't do all these things that everybody's expecting these days. So there's a little bit of I think, a come apart there between the expectation of the passenger and what the airlines can deliver.
There really is, because it used to be like, oh my God, there's Wi-Fi, how amazing, and you didn't mind that the faucet was a drip, drip, drip. Now, if it's not a gusher, you're really pissed off on the plane with it. I happen to think that it's just too damn expensive on the airline that I fly, and I've realized that, maybe this is a great time for me to disconnect from the universe. That being said, you may have not have seen this because it was just released this morning as we are recording this interview, that GoGo just put out a survey and said that 75% of travelers say having in-flight internet makes them feel less anxious because they could stay in contact with friends and family on the ground, and 65% say it makes them feel less anxious because they could stay connected to work. I thought that was an interesting observation, and to me makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I know. I think that makes a lot of sense as well. It's just human nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about food and beverage, and I've seen that a lot of the airlines now, they're taking away the peanuts because of allergies perhaps, and maybe they're even taking away those pretzels from the traveler that's not willing to pony up the bigger bucks. But I'm seeing food as a place for them to try to appeal towards those frequent travelers. And I'm seeing a lot more relationships with celebrity chefs, or at least bringing in types of food and beverage that seems to me to be a lot more upper class than it was just 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they've spent a lot of time and money with executive chefs, for lack of a better term, that are creating, easily replicable meals to offer. And they're very enticing. I mean, they do sound great, and for the most part, they taste pretty well as well. Yeah. And we see the same thing also I run the airport study at JD Power as well. We see the same thing on the airport side of things. It's that unexpected, or I can only get this meal here at this particular airport, and it sounds really exciting. We live in a fantastic age for, in my opinion, two things: food and beer.
Yeah.
and so the selection and the quality that we can get on the go is just amazing these days, and the airlines know that, and that's for lack of a better term, a delighter. An item that delights the passenger. It's unexpected. It goes above and beyond, and that's what they're trying to do with that food program. So yes, your observations are 100% spot on.
Yeah, and I'm amazed because on my airline, when I'm lucky enough to get that upgrade, which if you're listening is becoming less frequent, let's change that airline. I'm finding that they're introducing a lot of new things regularly. So it's not just like they're flipping it and you're going to have this for 6 months. It's like almost every single time I fly, I get a new opportunity to try something different. And I got to be honest, putting it in the lens of airplane food, pretty darn good. So, I'm fine to have all of this stuff, and it makes me feel better about stuff right now. Yeah. All right. So the survey here it's in its 14th year now, and you're seeing 7 years of increases. Amazing to me that Alaska Airlines is number 1, Delta's number 2, and then Air Canada is number 3. Was the Alaska Airlines numbers skewed at all by the absorption of Virgin Atlantic?
No, because we pay very close attention at JD Power to when the actual brands merge, and they merged just after our survey period ended.
Right.
So next year we have Virgin America numbers, which were quite good, actually. And as I don't have to tell you, it's quite a different experience to fly on Virgin America versus Alaska. So it's going to be interesting to see how those two brands meld. But Virgin America scores are quite good. Now we don't have a big sample size on them, so there's some variability around them. Otherwise I would quote you those numbers.
Yeah, of course.
But we're just not that statistically confident in them because we don't find that many Virgin America travelers.
Right.
But no, that next year Virgin America will be folded into Alaska. We won't ask that question. One of the things we're doing in the future is we're picking up OAG data, the official airlines guide. If you remember that book,
I do.
You're probably not old enough.
No, I
There you
remember
go.
it. Yeah, I've always been an aviation buff, though. I mean,
Yeah.
ever since I took that first flight when I was 3 years old to Disney World on Eastern Airlines, I've been
Oh,
fascinated by
yeah.
travel,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I remember Eastern Airlines as well. So OAG will give us actually when the person responds to which flight they've taken, we'll get about 75 or 80 data points, including the tail number of the aircraft, when we get the OAG data, and that'll be molded into our survey next year. So.
Excellent. I love that. So those were the traditional carriers we talked about. Now, low-cost carriers, Southwest and JetBlue, were the ones on top, with WestJet coming into third. What is the distinction between a traditional carrier and low-cost carrier? Because to me, I feel like a lot of those worlds have been coming together, especially with the new pricing matrices that we're seeing out there.
No, you're exactly right. We see that same convergence in scores. And we rely a little bit on outside sources, third parties, to kind of give us a guide as to how we should classify industries and players and brands within industries. So in this case, we rely on really the FAA to tell us what a hub and spoke traditional carrier is versus, we label as low cost.
Right.
So hang on a second, that's my cell phone. So we rely a little bit on a third-party source. Now, WestJet is a little bit different in that we don't, the FAA doesn't extend to Canada, believe it or not.
Right.
It just is simply United
Being that
States
it's federal.
Yeah, it's federal to the United
Shocking.
States. Yeah. So WestJet has big plans and is currently changing the way they do business. They introduced their ultra low-cost alternative, what they're calling ultra low cost, swoops, and they're going to be flying more routes, and they're buying different equipment. They've got international destinations. So, they're on our radar to reclassify sometime when we think that they've met these criteria. We're just trying to find a Canadian third party that tells us, these are the criteria. So that's how we make the separation. What does the FAA classify them in as? Is it more of a hub and spoke, or is it more of a point to point? And what's the basic fee structure?
Excellent.
There? So, you mentioned the winner for the second year in a row is Southwest, and number 2 is JetBlue. And if you look at our press release, and you'll see the bar charts there, you can see that those two are just dominating as far as satisfaction. They're so far ahead of almost everybody else, those two, and they're neck and neck.
Yeah.
Really do a fantastic job. Those are the brands with the most, as we mentioned before, commitment. Passengers who are committed to them. They really enjoy the experience. Southwest has great people scores. As anybody who's flown Southwest knows, they have a great sense of humor. They do a great job. They do a much better job smiling at the passenger, which also makes a difference. We actually track that as well in our data.
Right.
JetBlue has got that legacy of live TV in the back of the seat, and that's a halo for them, even though it's not anything that's exclusive anymore.
No,
it's not exactly
pretty impressive back in 2000, though.
It was just introduced it.
Yeah,
and it's sort of run of the mill now, but they've just got that person. The people who fly JetBlue think I'm flying this because I'm going to be entertained in flight with live TV and other choices. So they both do a great job. Now, JetBlue, on one hand, operationally, one of the criticisms that we get from the industry is, how can JetBlue do so well? They're terrible with on-time performance. Well, they're crazy enough to have basically, hubs and major, points, destinations, in the New York City metro area, which is the world's most complex airspace and more likely to be delayed. And that's part of the reason for it, not to mention some of the runway construction, some of their other big airports.
Right.
But again, they have that emotional commitment. They make the flying as fun as it possibly can be and as enjoyable as it possibly can be. And that's what's helped that brand grow and maintain its high status and satisfaction.
Any anecdotal evidence on the percentage of business travelers that prefer Southwest and JetBlue to your first and second place carriers for traditional, which was Alaska and Delta? Because for me, and I'm using me as the example here, I prefer to fly a traditional carrier over the low-cost carriers for a couple of reasons. One, I don't really think that they recognize me enough as a business traveler. And Southwest, it's like I got to fight for a seat every single time. I personally can't handle that pressure. And also just the way that the network is for Southwest, the airport's closer to me that I could fly out of, but I would have to change flights more frequently, which is not a preference of mine. So is there anything that you could add to that? Or maybe I'm just, an oddball crazy guy?
Oh, no, that's a good question. We do collect data. We can run that number. I just haven't done
That's
it
fine.
the last few years. I will say one thing that and this is not in defense of any traditional hub and spoke guys. But one of the things we find in the data is that expectations. What's the passenger expectations when they get on board and they look right? When they first get on board, and then they realize what kind of aircraft they're getting on.
Right.
And if you're getting on United or American or Delta, there's probably one of 20 different kinds of aircraft you might get on, and you really don't know. Even I'm a fairly frequent traveler. I'm sure you are as well, and you don't really think about which aircraft you're getting on until you actually step down that ramp.
Right.
And when you're flying Southwest and JetBlue, they have only a couple different kinds of aircraft these days, and you're never really disappointed. It's always the same experience. But United, American, Delta, you may be getting on a small aircraft. That's just somewhat disappointing. Right. There's not enough overhead space. That's it's going to be cramped, that kind of thing. And one of the major differences between the low-cost carriers, let's say, for example, and a good example are JetBlue and Southwest. They're operating much fewer types of aircraft, usually just one or two variations.
Right.
So that when you get on that, go down that ramp and turn right and look at the aircraft that you're getting onto, you're not going to be disappointed if you're getting onto the same aircraft every time. You kind of have the expectation of this is the JetBlue experience, this is the Southwest experience. And that's not really true of United and American and Delta. But on the other hand, as I say to everybody in the industry, American, United, and Delta couldn't make money flying a 737 on every route. They'd be crazy. They'd be out of business. They'd all be fired. So, but it's sort of something of an advantage for a carrier like JetBlue and a carrier like Southwest to have that same aircraft. And they're picking and choosing their routes. So that's, that fits in exactly what you were saying was how you pick your flights and which airline you're going to fly on.
Right.
Because Southwest cannot fly a 737 everywhere you want to go.
No, absolutely. And it's not even just the 737. It's more of an issue for me of where I want to go, aside from what I had said earlier in this conversation. I'm fortunate enough to have jobs that I'm flying overseas. And for me to remain loyal to an airline, it does inherently limit my choices to who I would like to be going with. Because if I'm spending all my time on one of these low-cost carriers, then I'm going to have to fly internationally with an airline that doesn't know me, and I'm not a frequent traveler, and therefore my experience on that international flight will be not of the same quality as I would have if I just stuck with the same airline every single flight. Right. So that's pretty much what I'm thinking when it comes to that. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed, Michael?
Oh, no. We've had a wide-ranging topics here, haven't we?
I thought this has been pretty good. So I think the best place to go is, how about a good shameless plug for JD Power? How can we find out more from what you folks do and, maybe get some insight on that new hotel study that'll be coming out later this year, as you do every single year?
Well, you can go to jdpower.com. This is our 50th anniversary year, actually.
Congrats.
And JD Power himself started the business quite literally on his kitchen table 50 years ago. Wow. 1968.
Wow, that's pretty awesome, and it's come so far. So be sure to check them out. And you know what? I'd love to see what you guys have to think. Join the conversation here or on social media. Drop me a line and use that hashtag Airline study, which JD Power is putting out there in order to collect more thoughts and opinions on this. I think that'll be great. Michael, thank you so much for being with me here today.
You're quite welcome, Glenn.
I really appreciate it, and I want to thank each and every one of you for listening to the No Vacancy podcast, and I love doing these bonus episodes. I definitely want to know what your favorite airline is and why, and maybe even which one that you can't stand and why you don't like that one either, okay? And also tell me what you think about all of these service animals that are on there and how the airlines you think are starting to deal with all these pretend service animals, not to besmirch the people who have real service animals, two distinct things. So drop me a line at glenn@rouse.media or find me on social media at Traveling Glenn on Twitter, Instagram, and anywhere you like to be social. And of course, check out novacancynews.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week. That is, unless I decide to, go down and start eating airline food uncontrollably. All right, guys, see you next week.